situations, we want to help you as best we can. With that, we will get started. Again, we're a little over, I see about 45 people have logged in. Again, any questions that come up, please put them in Q&A. We'll handle them at the very end. So the title of this event is 2 Ways to Move to Canada from the USA. We want to help you craft a plan of action. Path to Canada and Marani Law are the 2 people bringing this to you. If any of you are familiar with Syndesa's Path to Canada is one of our services. In terms of the agenda, what we'll do is we'll go through introductions, then cover the question of why you want to move to Canada. We're going to talk about 2 ways: intercompany transfer or apply directly for a job in Canada, throw out some next steps, and then Q&A. Zaynah, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks everyone who's joining. Great to see. I see you're mostly in Jersey, but NYC is cooler to say. So it's nice to see you all here. Feel free to put your questions in the chat during, while we're chatting, because sometimes your questions are relevant and they're easier to answer on the spot. So I'm totally open to interruptions like that. And we will also do a Q&A at the end. In terms of income tax, because I've seen a couple questions on tax, and I don't know, Mark, if that's something that you're willing to answer, but it's not something that's in my wheelhouse. But maybe we can do another one on that.
Yeah.
Just a quick introduction about myself. So my name is Zaynah. I'm the founder and managing partner of Marani Law. So we're a business immigration law firm. And we've been around for about 14 years. We work with businesses and individuals who have jobs in Canada. We do work permits, labor market impact assessments, permanent residence, etc. And so, yeah, I think immigration's there's not too much more to say about it, but happy to answer any of your questions. Should we flip, Mark?
Yes. Thanks, Zaynah. Quick overview of me, founder of Syndesa and Path to Canada. Both of them call them sister companies. Unique perspective. My background's all in tech. I've worked for a bunch of startups in Silicon Valley, California native, US citizen. But I also put it in there, US citizen, lived in Canada for 5 years. So actually, when I went to university in Canada for a master's, I was on a student visa for 2 years, went right back to Silicon Valley to Palo Alto, back to my home base to work at a startup. I also then moved to Toronto for 3 years after that. I was on work visas too. I got 2 different work visas in my time in Toronto. So for me, when I started this company 10 years back, it's the perspective of an American who understands things are different in Canada. I got to know how, I can't think of a better way to say this. I got to learn in Silicon Valley how messed up US immigration is. I say that as a US citizen. I got to hear from friends about the unfairness of H-1B policy, green cards, all of that got very familiar to me. So when I started a company 10 years ago in Canada, originally my goal was I build engineering teams in Canada for VC-backed companies in the US. What I learned over those years of operating of that is Canada has amazing immigration programs. Because my company is Canadian, we have the ability to utilize those programs, but we're also putting this webinar together just to inform you of different solutions that exist. But my team definitely has deep experience not only with working with great immigration lawyers like Zaynah. We have a deep understanding of once people get to Canada, we can employ them. We know Canadian HR, Canadian payroll. We put all those pieces together. So what we're going to do then is we're going to walk through one problem. So we say this statement can be put any way. Maybe some of you are in the US and you're not happy with, you may look at a long green card wait and say, I would be 110 years old by the time I finally got this green card. Maybe you're looking at the H-1B situation saying, this isn't fair, this isn't right. I feel like I'm living at the whim of a lottery. And you're right, you are. There's different situations people are in. What we're basically want to show options are is if you're looking at US immigration as a never-ending hassle, what is your option to leave and go to Canada? Again, the 100-year wait, I used to think that was kind of a crazy number until I started hearing validation of it over and over and over from Indian nationals describing what number they've been given. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, US, as probably a lot of you know, you graduate from university, You have the ability to work for any company on an H-1B. The US does not allow you to start a company. So the intercompany transfer, there's a scenario there where Zaynah can talk about how that could work for you if that is your situation. And then the last bullet point is we're going to basically show you options to live in North America without having the uncertainty that comes with US immigration. So number one, pathway to Canada. Zaynah, over to you. We're going to talk about the intercompany transfer and how that works.
Great. So I guess the first question is, what is an intercompany transfer? So an intercompany transfer, or an ICT, which is a bit less of a mouthful to say, is a transfer from a foreign entity into a Canadian entity. Okay, so in this case, we'll take a US entity. Well, so say we're sending somebody from the US to Canada, okay? The eligibility for an ICT is that you need to have been working for the company for at least 1 year in the previous 3 years, and you're currently still working there. So the interesting thing with that is that if you worked there, for example, from 3 years ago to 2 years ago, and then you took a gap, and then they hire you back, you've still got the 1 year in the 3 years, and you're currently still working there. Okay, so it doesn't have to be that 1 year just prior to transferring it. So oftentimes we'll have somebody who's been with the company, left a company, come back, hired for another week or so, and then they can transfer it. Okay, that's just one of the nuances that's kind of interesting with an ICT. And the ICTs have to be in, there's for specific, not specific occupations, but sort of specific levels of occupations. So either you need to be a specialized knowledge worker, a senior manager, or an executive. And we'll go into those in the next slides. So we can flip over to slide number 8. Thank you very much. So let's talk about what a specialized knowledge worker is, because these are some of the more complicated ones. Okay, so a specialized knowledge worker is generally like a technical worker, maybe an engineer, maybe a developer. It could even be like, it could be any kind of engineer, it could be a mechanical engineer. It's not necessarily just tech related, okay? But they need to have specialized IP knowledge, okay? So that we could say, we're not able to just hire any random Canadian to fill this position. This person has company specific knowledge, they've been trained, and we need that knowledge in Canada, okay? It's got to be significant experience. And we even have to go so far as to show like internal training certifications. For example, if you've done like an internal course, or if you've attended meetings, we need the list of the meetings. If you've had a mentor, we need a list of all the meetings with the mentors and all of those things. Like they're not required when you look at the list of required documents, but they're very, very, very important to include so that you can prove your specialized knowledge when transferring in. And then the next category, if you can switch more, thank you, is for a senior manager. So senior manager is sort of the level above the specialized knowledge. They would supervise like a team or a department, but they're not executive level. Okay, we still would want to show senior manager specialized knowledge, but that part's not required. And it's not scrutinized as much. Okay, so a senior manager could, they might even have a team of like, 3 or 10 or whatever it may be. They have discretion over their day-to-day operations. They've got people reporting into them. They could be in charge of like hiring, terminating, etc. Okay, and then finally, the ICT category is also for an executive level manager. Okay, so sorry, an exec. Okay, so they maybe direct the management of the organization, establish goals and policies of the organizations, very minimal supervision, etc. Now, the interesting thing about the intercompany transfers for US nationals or any national who does not require a visa to enter Canada, and this goes for actually any work permit, is that what you can do is you can actually prepare the application in advance. Okay, so basically the way it would work with our clients is that we would, we collect documents from you, we collect documents from your employer, we collate the whole application, we send it to you by way of PDF, you print that PDF and you can fly into Canada with that PDF, okay? And you show your application to the officer at the port of entry upon arrival. Okay, so the first person you'd see is a Canada Border Services Agency officer. They would then direct you over to immigration. You'd wait in a bit of an immigration line. I say a bit of a line, it could be a bit, it could be a bit more of a bit. But that immigration officer would, if approved, they can issue your work permit on the spot right there. So unlike other countries where it might take months or years to apply for a work permit, you can actually do it right away here. And if you've got a dependent spouse, your spouse can apply for a work permit valid for the same duration as yours. And if you've got dependent children, they can apply for visitor records or study permits valid for the same duration as yours. And the kids can also attend public school, and there is no tuition for them. Okay. Then once you've got your work permit, you're also entitled to all of our health benefits, our provincial health benefits. I think there's a waiting period. If I'm not mistaken, it's 153 days in Ontario. It depends on the province, but then we have our health system is very different than it is in the US, and you'd be entitled to be able to make use of that as well. Okay. The last slide that I have on the intercompany transfers is a little bit more in depth. I just want to, Mark, do you see if there's any questions? I just want to make sure I didn't miss any questions on it. Oh,
yeah, let me go there for a second.
Well, maybe we'll hold. Let me just finish this ICT one, I guess. Okay. This is the last one. Okay. Intercompany transfers for startups. So this is kind of an interesting one, and this is actually like a big niche for us. And so a startup company is a company that's starting in Canada, even if it's been established in the US or somewhere else for a long time. Okay. Now there are arguments to say, if it's been established 8-10 years or more, that it's not considered a startup, but it usually is for Canadian immigration purposes considered to be a startup. If you are one of those first people that are being transferred in, usually it would be in a senior manager exec level position, but sometimes they really are specialized knowledge workers because you need engineers, et cetera, to sort of lead the teams here. Those are a little more complicated. Now, like I said, we do them all the time, but there are nuances, okay? So we would need companies' business plans, financials, statements of work, master services agreements. If they're transferring in a specialized knowledge worker, we need office space. We need to be able to show that the company's expected to be doing business here. We need to make sure that the work is guided by the Canadian operations, et cetera. And that part, and we need a business plan, like a really, really in-depth business plan with financial forecasts and staffing plans, et cetera. And they really do look at those business plans. I've actually had officers who looked at the business plan and said, oh, we're not quite sure about this staffing plan. And then they ask for more information. So they actually go through them, or they might say, I had one time, which was really funny because they paid such close attention. They said, oh, well, this employee is actually not mentioned in the staffing plan. So how is this person supposed to fit? And, you send these applications into the officer, you might have a 20-30 page business plan, not expecting that they would actually review it so closely, but some of them actually do. And the thing about Canadian immigration is that there's a lot of discretion to the officers. Okay, so one officer might have one decision and another officer might have a completely different opinion. Okay, so I recently had a company, the overall revenue is $53 million US. Okay, so it's a decent sized company. We submitted it, and the first officer thought that they didn't have the finances to be able to support the employees in Canada. We were applying for one employee. It was crazy. We had an amazing business plan. We had everything we could possibly need. All I's dotted, all T's crossed, and it came back and it was refused. And it was such a shock because that to me is a home run. And like I said, I've been doing this 14 years. So we resubmitted it, had a different officer and it was approved with no problem. Okay, so you just need to know that, you know, while this is relatively straightforward, our system is much better than it is in the United States. Like, you know, like it just, you need to make sure that you have all of these documents properly laid out so there is no holes. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's why it's always good to have somebody who knows what they're doing to help, you know, whether it's us or someone else. Like, you just, there are nuances that are not explained on the website. And I think that's really important to note.
I have a question for you, Zaynah. So in this
Sure.
model you just described here, so a lot of the people I think on this call are they're individuals. They may not be CEOs or COOs, but there's there's a really good angle here where if you think of a US company, if they were doing multiple H-1B submissions every year, that means at some point they probably have multiple failures. But if the company had some scale, like you mentioned, the idea of having conversation with their executive team saying, look, the US procedure is expensive. You lose some of the best people in the world and they have to leave the US. These are people that are assets to your company. It's almost like they would be in their best interest to say, open a branch in Canada, but you're doing it for two reasons. One of them is the people who couldn't stay in the US could go to Canada, but if you're a sizable company, I mean, it doesn't have to be 53 million, but you can also do business in Canada. Yeah, you could be a couple million, but you could almost solve two problems. You could be like, do business in Canada, so then the business plan's there, but then move people who have immigration challenges, so you don't have to lose them. You just move them north of the border, and you'd be like, yeah, it's a branch office. People are going to go there. And I think, would this lead into the whole L1 thing on the US, where you tell the US company, when you have an established branch in Canada and it operates for a couple of years, you could actually bring people in from around the world into your Canadian office and then move them to the US office. It's actually a bigger strategy.
Yeah, so a very typical situation would be like a company from India. Okay, they've got, depends, their HQ might be, usually the HQ, let's say it's in India. Okay, then they've got a branch or subsidiary in the US. They have a whole bunch of problems with their H-1B. So then they start moving the Indian nationals who've been refused the H-1Bs into Canada, where they do some nearshore work and where they also expand into the Canadian market. And it's proven very, very fruitful for them. And that's a large majority of our clients.
Yeah, we've heard that use case too. We'll hear like Office India, Office Canada, they're coming to Syndesa's or Path to Canada for advice. And in the back of our minds, we're like, let's just open the office in Canada, have Zaynah set you up, and then these problems start to go away in terms of moving people around. So yeah, that's, if anything, for some people listening to this call, you may think, okay, I should probably have my boss or a manager contact Zaynah to learn how to do this. Absolutely. And then we'll talk. Oh, go ahead, Zaynah.
Wait, shall I just run through a couple of the questions, or do you want to hold them till the end?
Actually, let's see if we can cover some of these. I'll look through some of these to see if any of them are very specific to ICT intercompany transfers. So
I see one that I can answer very quickly, which was about the 153-day waiting period.
Okay.
For the health benefits. And so usually your employer would provide you with private medical coverage in the interim. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Another one is about if an ICT is usually closed or open. ICTs are closed work permits. That means that they're company specific. Okay, and you have to work for that company under the terms and conditions that we applied under. So in that position for that salary, for those many hours, etc. And there are mandatory wage floors. Well, for US nationals, we might be able to get around them. But in general, there are mandatory wage floors. Okay.
And one follow-up question on Puneet's question, it's a closed work permit for ICT, but if the person's coming in with a partner,
the dependent is open.
Is an open work permit. They can work for any Canadian company.
Yeah.
That gets them out of the H4 nonsense like you have in the US, where your partner may not be able to work. In this case, Canada's like, why wouldn't your partner be able to work anywhere they want to? So it's a more thoughtful system.
Right, and family reunification is a big thing in Canada. So we want families to be able to be together and to be able to settle together.
And I think Puneet's asking some really great questions here, because the next follow-up one you can see right below the closed work permit one is about cost, et cetera, open up. That would be a great one for Puneet to reach out to you directly to say, walk me through how this works and the setup, et cetera.
Yeah.
There's a really good immigration discussion. You've had many of these, Zaynah, where you're sitting with the U.S. executive team. And this was shocking to me when I heard some of our clients. We asked, well, what was the legal fees you set aside for H-1B? And they're like, well, 15 to 20,000 for the H-1B, and another 5 or 10,000 on top of that for green card. And I was like, so you put aside 20?
It's too bad we don't charge that much.
Yeah, and I hear these numbers, and I'm like, you did put that number aside on a chance that someone wins the lottery. They're like, yeah, worker's amazing. We have no choice in the U.S. You have to do this. And the Canadian immigration professionals like Zaynah hear these numbers, and they're like, okay, that's the U.S. If you did a Canada strategy, long term, this is significantly less investment. Plus, you can bring anyone anywhere around the world in. So it's unfortunate the U.S. companies, I'm an American citizen again, we turn to our immigration lawyer in the U.S. and say, tell me how to do this. But your company doesn't get to hear of, there's another option in Canada. It would be more cost effective and it's going to work better. So again, reach out to Zaynah afterwards. She'll put her information up to have a conversation with her firm. Number two pathway, Zaynah, this is your world. This is global talent stream. We have a graph on the Syndesus website that compares global talent stream to H-1B. It's almost like, I always say the Canadians looked at H-1B and said, that's the worst immigration system possible, work visa system possible. What if we did everything the opposite for our work visa, which they basically did. The goal of the program is to help Canadian companies hire foreign skilled workers easily at a low cost. And so in this model, employer has to be approved by the Canadian government to be able to bring people in. It's not just something they decide to do one day. There's a complicated process called an LMBP. It makes sure that only a Canadian company that can afford to pay the workers and is established in Canada can bring people in. It's open to all industries. The Global Talent Stream LMA is valid for 3 years. Work permit for that same time period can be renewed. And as part of Canada's global skills strategy, I was just at a meeting this morning at the Canadian Consulate in New York. It was about Canada's AI strategy. And one of the speakers commented, they said, global skills strategy, Canada has a national program designed to bring 200,000 people in. It's about realizing you can't graduate enough technical people, software developers, AI developers, any technical people. We've got to have a good immigration program to bring this in. So there's definitely this is a government mandate to bring the best of talent into Canada. So a question that's come to the Syndesus team, the Path to Canada team, people have asked, I'm sitting in the US, I'm sitting in Sao Paulo, I'm sitting in Mumbai, I'm sitting in Shanghai, I'm sitting in Islamabad, Pakistan, I'm outside the US or I'm inside the US. How on earth am I going to figure out which Canadian companies are actually signed up to sponsor work visas? Because most people go through this frustrating thing in the US of, you reach out to a company, you get an interview, and they find out you need a work authorization. They're like, oh, I can't deal with the H-1B lottery. No, it's too complicated. No. And you're like, but I would be perfect. People have said the same thing about Canada. They're like, okay, I think I hear this immigration system's good. Where do I find the companies that actually signed up for it? Hundreds have. So what we're going to do is we'll share this out at the end of the presentation. There's a government website that lists every company in Canada that signed up for the program because they believe in hiring immigrants. We share that out to you. You'll have to do some homework. You may go through, look at those companies, and you have to go look through their open websites, their careers page. But it's basically cuts short the concept, the challenge of, will someone sponsor my work visa? These companies got permission to sponsor work visas. We think that might be a good avenue to do your research to find a new tech career in Canada. And just so that the model's understood, say you applied to one of these companies, they interviewed you. The idea is they would probably ask up front, do you need a work visa? And you'd be like, yeah, Global Talent Stream, I know you signed up for that. And the idea basically is you go through the interview and you get the job offer, but you'd be interviewing because then when they give you the job offer, they're like, okay, now we're going to sponsor your work visa. We will do this as part of the job offer. The global talent stream, no matter how much of an amazing work visa it is, it does require a job offer from a Canadian company. And so that your part is to interview and get the job. Then it's the Canadian company's job then to say, we're going to reach out to an immigration professional like Zaynah. We're going to get your work permit in place. Let's get you to Canada. Zaynah, over to you. This is
I'm looking to hire at my immigration firm. You know a lot about the global talent stream. So let me know if you need a job.
I'll let you know. Over to you though, as an immigration professional, talk about these two categories here of
Sure.
global talent stream.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to understand about the labor market impact assessments or I'm going to say LMIA, through the global talent stream. Okay, so it's for direct hires. So I saw a couple of questions saying that you were students in the US, you lost your job, someone had lost their job a couple of months ago. How are they going to get a job in Canada? So this is a really good way to consider. So it's a direct hire. It's generally for companies that are unique and innovative or have high investments in Canada. And we usually use it for tech occupations. Okay. Now, when you do a normal LMIA, because these are special LMIAs, when you do a normal LMIA, a company has to advertise. They need to recruit and they need to keep a spreadsheet and they need to mark down everyone who's applied for a position and show why anyone who applied that's a Canadian citizen or permanent resident is not suitable for the role. Okay. We then have to submit that to Employment and Social Development Canada. There's a 4 or 5 month processing time, and then they make a decision. Okay. If the LMIA is approved, that is the basis for applying for a work permit. Okay. Now, through the global talent stream, it is significantly faster. In fact, your processing time is about 2 weeks. Okay. But the difference is instead of having to advertise and go through that sort of 4 or 5 month process, we already have a list of occupations, which is under category B, where we've determined that there's a labor market shortage in Canada. Okay. And basically what an employer does is they apply to Employment and Social Development Canada, and they say, in exchange for you allowing us to hire this temporary foreign worker, we will commit to benefiting the local labor market for Canadian citizens and permanent residents in the following 3 ways. Okay, and I won't go into what the LMBP is because it's not necessary, it's more relevant to like a company. But examples are, they'll commit to, a budget for training Canadian citizens and permanent residents, or they would commit to the temporary foreign workers disseminating knowledge to the Canadian citizens and permanent residents. And there's a few other benefits that we can choose from, but those are basically how it goes. And what you can even do is do a labor market benefit plan. Say they anticipate hiring, 5, 10, 100 temporary foreign workers through this program the next 2 or 3 years. We can do a plan that's big enough so that we don't have to keep updating the plan for every application. Okay. So if you have, for example, an LMBP that's approved for 5 people, then the first one you have to do it this, and it'll probably take the 2 weeks, and then numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 will probably be done in a couple of days because they're almost rubber stamped. Okay, so I'll just run you through the categories. Okay, so there's category. I'm going to start with category B because that's the most commonly used one. Category B is a list of specific occupations. Okay, so typically we'd use that for like computer engineers, developers. There's actually graphic designers on there. There's like business systems analysts. They're more like those specialized knowledge workers. Okay. And, there's not, like we need to show that the person meets the requirements for the position being filled. But aside from that, it's not that, we don't have to show that much. It's not that complicated if you have a good labor market benefit plan, which we can write out for your employers. Okay. The other category is category A. Now, usually you don't use category A. They generally don't like us to use them more than twice a year, unless there's like extenuating circumstances. Okay, so category A is for like unique specialized positions, okay, that they don't fall under category B. Okay. One example that we recently did for this was like an international benefits coordinator. Okay, which, to be honest, I didn't fully understand how specialized that is until I was reading the job description. But you know, like there is very complicated, and you're not going to find any random Canadian who can just fill that position, even if they've done benefits coordination, because it's international. So there's a whole bunch of things that are involved in there that you know that someone wouldn't just be able to step into. So they needed to move somebody. I think they were from Argentina. So we moved someone from Argentina to the company here in Canada to fill that position. Okay. And, you know, it's a little bit more complicated in terms of process, but not necessarily. Like, it's more steps for us and for the employer, but not necessarily for the individual. Okay. So first we have to have a referral from a referral partner, which we have connections with. So we would go to there's a list of referral partners. So we'd go to our partner and we'd say, here's this company, here's this position. We think this would be a really good category A referral. Can you help us to send it in? They send it into Ottawa. Ottawa accepts it, and then we go through the regular process. Okay. There's minimum salaries that they need to have in category A. It's either $80,000 or the prevailing wage, so one of the mandatory wage floors. They've got to have like very in-depth advanced knowledge, and they have to have like a degree. Like ideally you'd have like a master's or something. I think we've gotten them with a bachelor's, but you know, like the higher up the better. And also at least 5 years of work experience in the field. And again, those are somewhat unusual, because, you know, like the global talent stream is often used by tech companies, and, you know, like the regular users it's generally engineers and developers and analysts, but it comes up. And so once we have that labor market impact assessment, we would then use that as the basis to apply for your work permit. Okay, the work permit, again, if you're a US national, can be applied for at the border upon arrival. So you're looking at 2 weeks for the labor market impact assessment, and then you can just apply for the work permit. And in my 14 years, I've never seen a work permit refused if the labor market impact assessment's been approved. Okay, so no guarantee, but if you have the LMA, it'd be very unlikely that your work permit would be refused unless there's some sort of like medical issue, criminal infraction, background security check, something that, you know, that's not related to the LMIA. The other good thing about the LMIAs is that they give you, so I don't know, I mean, we're not really going into permanent residence today, but if you know anything about the permanent residence, you know it's based on a point system, okay? And having an LMIA helps you to tick the boxes for job offer, which gives you extra points for permanent residence. So if it's something that you're looking to do from a long-term perspective, an LMIA might be a good, like if you're looking to move here from a long-term perspective, then LMIA would be really helpful.
Thanks, Zaynah. I think that's a good point. I've noticed from talking with multiple people who were considering this, everyone had the mindset of express entry. That is the way into Canada. And these webinars are great examples to say it's one way in. Here is ICT another. Here is a work permit another. And as the points go up for permanent residence, I think one thing we found that it's important to emphasize is what you just said. If you came in on a work permit, if you found a Canadian company that sponsors you, you get in that way. Then you go to your application for express entry. You add in all this information, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, you got a work permit? Okay, you know, you have a job in Canada, 50 points. You're working in Canada each year, more points. So it becomes global talent stream where your work permit becomes additive to your permanent residence option, or to supercharge it even.
And that's even so the LMA gives you the points right away. But if you're here on an intercompany transfer work permit, you would start getting points after a year. So that would be the difference in terms of PR.
Exactly. Well, let's talk. We're nearing the end. We'll talk about the second pathway into Canada. Path to Canada also as a talent pool. There's going to be a link where you can, on the Path to Canada website, you can add your information. Our goal is to try and match you to Canadian companies that we're working with that are hiring. So that's what we call it 2A and 2B. 2A is go to the list of approved companies that are sponsoring work permits, go apply to them directly. Second, Path to Canada, we're also looking for companies that are willing to sponsor work visas. In our case, what we're usually doing is we're working with maybe an American company who has a branch in Canada or wants to open an office in Canada. So our focus is more on, we'll get you the work permit and you'll be in Canada. You might be working remotely for another company. The Canadian government website we give you is going to be Canadian companies are looking, both models, you're in Canada. And then Zaynah and I are going to have another webinar coming up. This one's going to be a little different. It's going to be targeting a US citizen. So I know a lot of you in this webinar may be thinking, I would like to be a US citizen, but the immigration system is too goofy and can't help me get there. We also know there's a group of American citizens, depending on the election, depending on, doesn't matter if you're Trump or Harris, different people have different political beliefs, but we find that every year American citizens choose to move to Canada. So we're going to have a webinar in a few weeks calling out to them saying, for whatever reasons you may have, we're going to show you your path to Canada. We're going to show you how you can move to Canada. And then we're going to show you, if you happen to have a cool American job and you want to keep that job while you're sitting in Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, Halifax, wherever you choose to live in Canada, we're going to show how you could keep your US job. It's just we're trying to show that there's a lot of different ways to move to Canada for a lot of different groups of people, but that's a separate topic. We'll be covering that in a few weeks for the American citizens. So next steps, again, we're about to jump into the Q&A here. If anything was interesting, if you look at Path to Canada and said, I want to understand more about that option, what jobs are available there, please reach out to us. ICT, anything came up with that or more questions on Canadian immigration options, you're like, I want to talk to a Canadian immigration professional. Here's Zaynah's contact information. Again, this will be sent out, will be shared with everyone. But right now, I think we'll jump into questions. I think there's a last slide. Again, this whole presentation will be sent out. I think the last slide, nope,